So, in the life of a cyclical keto plus intermittent fasting pretty much encompasses the formatting of either 18-6, 19-4, and or 24 formatting window from as early as 12:30 a.m., in which that also needs to be accounted for the sleeping window. Upon the very first 30 minutes of waking up, we began by drinking out of water. And this water is pretty much going to be either a combination of soda water with pinches of Himalayan salt, failing that, at least iodized rock salts, and that is going to be within 400 milliliters worth, or approximately 2 glasses of soda water, and then followed by up to 800 to a liter worth of just basic water with another pinches of Himalayan salt, depending on how busy is the scheduling of the day ahead. The fasting continues all the way in the afternoons. Throughout the chunk of the afternoon fasting windows, we pretty much sipping through the caffeinated warm beverages, whether that is in the form of black tea and or black coffees. And within it, we shall put in another sprinkles of salts needed for mineral uptakes. That is, most importantly, potassium, in which that is encompassed through either the usage of potassium chloride and or potassium bitetrate acid, in which that is encompassed from the use of cream of tartar, which is commonly found as baking products. The cream of tartar is only going to be pinched in very, very small amount due to its very high concentration of potassium for any given grammage. Magnesium can be quite a tricky one to supplement during any intermittent fasting windows because of the fact that most magnesium supplementations are enclosed upon with several binding agents and or rice flour or other minerals and or any other amino acid chelated delivery vehicles, in which that may or may not constitute a calorific response, in which therefore, as one would expect, is something that we try to minimize altogether throughout the fasting window. So what this author instead have done as a daily morning ritual is a magnesium topical oil spray DIY solution, in which all this is simply in a ratio of 1:1 distilled water and magnesium chloride flakes. There is also times where, unfortunately, it is not possible nor is it practical to use magnesium oil. During hot and or warmer seasons, it is, from this author's experience, it is very, very uncomfortable to the point whereby it may actually negate the absorption of the much needed magnesium topically, due to the fact that it may also compete with the drawing of bodily fluids, sweats in this case, in which those sweats also constitutes its own mineral profile as a sign of loss. So what do we do in such a case or in such a scenario? Well, what this author personally have only during his own experimental stage at this stage, again as an indemnity declaration, none of that, this is not meant to be taken as a totalitarian gospel for all to follow. In fact, is to take the magnesium chloride flakes, just very, very small amounts, no more than, say, what we see here in this recording, in which this is only equating as just around about less than a few flakes total, and just stir it all together until it completely dissolves within our warm caffeinated beverages. So in this case here, it's just a cup of coffee. and let the fasting periods continue from there onwards. There are still nevertheless some supplementations that nevertheless do carry their merits and applications, especially amidst times of great, persistent, and prolonged sustained difficulties, psychosocial condescendences, and or just in general very prolonged stressful environments. So these supplements range from, once again, anti-inflammatories mostly, as well as adaptogenic amino acids, e.g. acetylated L-carnitine, and or just very, very small bites of aspirin, uncoated, plain aspirin, a pack of 12 for just under $1. This entire fasting window continues all the way until the very first hint of a calorie intake is thus preceded as a pre-workout and or an intra-workout concoction formula. That being composing of, at the very least, creatine monohydrate, potassium bicarbonate, and or baking soda, sodium bicarbonate. On top of that, for flavoring, we are using cordials to save us money. Any given cordials actually work in our favor for as long as actually sugar-free, in which every 100 ml should constitute no more than 5 calories. This pre-breaking the fast session actually begins at anywhere around, on average, 6:30 to 6:45 p.m. or even as late as 7 p.m. depending on how busy the day of scheduling, and then all the way until the end of the training session itself. Unfortunately, this is neither the space nor time for us to debate such a frivolous topic. The actual training component itself will, of course, as one would expect, will constitute far more energy expenditure than the entire 15 calories or even less than 50 calories worth of pre-workouts and or intra-workout supplementations throughout, not just 30 minutes of strenuous exercises, but try 60, try up to 2 hours of prolonged endurance strenuous training exercise, and see how many calories does such a training program actually imposes. That, by the humble opinion of this author, is nevertheless considered a minuscule impact on whether or not it adversely impacts or halts the entire intermittent fasting experience. So what does a sample day of training looks like? Well, this is a screenshot from an earlier write-up annual Food for Thoughts back in 2017. What we can see here is more or less still a general, consistent and sustained training regimen that this author nevertheless tries to maintain. That is specifically 4 days of training. So what we have just seen here is the sample uppers training. Next up is the lowers or the lower body components training. no more than 30 seconds to 45 seconds maximum of resting time in between sets, with an RPE scale of anywhere between 6 to 7 on the RPE scale. Yes, that may seem minuscule. And if anyone were to think of that as being very, very comfortable and very leisure-like, then congratulations, more power to you. Just wait until another day of training comes along. So, after the training session ends, we may now begin our very first calorie intake in the form of liquid-based post-workout solution. And by no means to anybody's surprise, just a simple whey protein shake, in which this consists of, very crucial, less than 30 grams worth of protein. It must be light, but it must be calorific enough in a sense that we must allow the digestion process to begin from here onwards. So in other words, the protein intake should be small enough to be digested comfortably, and yet also at the same time sufficient enough to allow the nutrient partition to take place. After the liquid post-workout meal is done, which is taken at around anywhere between 8:30 p.m., 8:45 p.m., and if the day is very, very busy of a schedule, could be as late as 9 p.m., then a waiting window is required before the very first solid meal. All the years of this author's own N=1 self-inquiring experiences amidst training, amidst Cyclical Keto plus intermittent fasting regimen, is that hunger seems paradoxically blunted. Yes, hunger. That is, whether it is an emotionally driven or a physiologically driven craving of some sort of a response or anticipation, seems somewhat blunted, even despite strenuous, and this author means it, strenuous training experiences, day in, day out, almost consistently 4 days per week. Unfortunately, this author is unable to explain the mechanistic understanding or the processes on the rationale behind why this paradox does occur from time to time. This does not mean, however, that hunger itself remains blunted for hours upon hours on end. However, it needs to be noted that hunger should be relatively respected for what it is, for what they are, to be anticipated as they naturally progress over time. And from which then we may begin our very first solid meal of the day, the featured meal, the featured breakfast. This featured meal consists of anywhere between higher protein and or lower protein ratio, depending on the needs and concerns of hunger and our satiety. If, for instance, there is a markedly higher hunger pangs noted throughout the day, or that if the day has been somewhat thoroughly busy and exhausting as such, that there is a markedly deteriorating performance decrements in training meritocracies, then a higher protein intake is always warranted over the fat intake. So, in this case here, we have 2 eggs, some bits of radish, not too much, just for the little bit of vitamin C content, a handful stick of celery, which equates to, say, 90 grams, extra virgin olive oil, and for condiments, which is very important, Caesar dressing. And of course, the protein, which that is king mackerel. Luckily enough, this king mackerel was found for sale for just $1 each. And what's interesting about this mackerel is that it has a markedly favorable and very high buffer omega-3 concentrations compared with other forms of mackerel. Starting off with a mandatory mineral supplement. So in this case here, chelated magnesium. Meanwhile, there's another disclaimer that this author would like to make as a side note, that this author actually prefer eating his feature solid meals while standing up, as opposed to sitting down. Unfortunately, readers and prospective viewers may not likely find the standing stances to be as inviting, nor is it welcoming. Hence, just for presentation's sake, this author is to be recorded consuming his meals while sitting down, and also subjected against very bright studio lighting. First of all, is that we would like to have our first bite of food that is coming from first and foremost the most nutrient dense whole food groups only. So that perfect holistic whole food that should be eaten first of all is nothing more than the eggs in this case. So the reason why that this author instinctively chosen eggs to be the very first food that he would chew upon is due to the need to prepare the stomach acidity and digestive profiling to take place. Not many people know about this. In order for the hydrochloric acid secretion to begin their endogenous expressions at their fullest potential, must be assisted with food sources that contain some choline. And it just happens that eggs are the perfect source of choline, acetylated choline in this case, to prime the digestive mechanisms, to pave onward the necessary digestive processes for this meal and the next meal afterwards. Now that we have actually eaten the eggs, this author actually now prefers to take a key fat-soluble micronutrient and or vitamin. In this case here, it is vitamin E in this case, as specified and best applicable to the context and the nature of the meal in this case here, which is full of monounsaturated fatty acids and PUFA as well. So vitamin E helps prevent lipid peroxidation, damaging mechanisms and orchestrations were to occur. And after that, the main course begins and continues from there onwards. In order for this video to be shown at its full presentation, we are now switching to another angle. This time here is top-down view, so that readers can actually see in real time exactly the rate of the food that is being chewed upon. That is, one chew, one spoonful, feeding at a time, with a small utensil, not using big utensils. And now, once again, switching to back to the default camera angle, just so that readers can actually view this author actual eating evidence all the way to the finish. Now that the meal has finished, it is now time for another micronutrient support. This could be either magnesium or zinc. In this case here, it is simply just another capsule of magnesium chelated. So, after some time, we have what we call a pre-dessert meal. What this pre-dessert meal consists of either a 35 to 40 grams worth of cheese, or should the resources allow, chicken liver pate. Alongside that, with the chase. There is something elusive and interesting about eating any liver pate after the end of a long, difficult, and or stressful day. The feeling of which is quite difficult to describe other than the fact that it felt so nutritionally accomplishing. That is, it feels as though that one feels nutritionally fulfilled. It is very difficult to describe what that sensation is. This author finds that chicken livers contains a markedly lower amounts of vitamin A, in which this can be quite a noteworthy quality to look out for when it comes to those who actually rely on eating livers very, very regularly, because there seems to be a case of concern whereby vitamin A toxicity can indeed arise from certain susceptible individuals. So hence, for these individuals, they may wish to monitor their intake of vitamin A. So when it comes to the low-carb desserts, we have a number of options ranging from elaborate and or all the way down to just simple, humble bare bones, starting from the 50 grams worth of desiccated coconuts, a generous amount of added cream, and then followed by some additional means of protein powders. Lastly, just an additional sweetener if we are using an unflavored source of protein, that is. So let's break things down when it comes to the overall macros and calories for any given weekly cycle. So throughout Mondays to Fridays, the lowest calorie intake that this author has persisted, that will be a tad shy under 1400 calories, somewhere between at least 60% fats ratio, 20 to 25% protein intake, whereas the remaining will be just net carbohydrates. On the highest end, it will be somewhere amidst at least 1900 calories to all the way up to 2200 calories. When it comes to the higher experimental caloric surplus days, that will be comprising of ratios towards the more or less towards the higher fat percentages between at least 65% to 75% fats, with the remaining just dedicated towards protein and remaining as net carbohydrates. And once again, these experimentally high caloric days within ketogenic or even just semi-low carbohydrate days is not something that this author would actually generally condone, unless of course if the resources allow, and unless of course if the financial expenditures allow for such luxury. As repeated many times in the parent manuscript, it requires additional digestive supports, inevitably as such that one may require betaine HCl pepsins and or liver health support. All in all, this author hopes that the following information breakdown will be nevertheless useful at providing a summary snapshot sample day in the life of Cyclical Keto plus intermittent fasting regimen. Now, should this be followed to everyone else outside this author's own comprehension, indemnity, liability, and responsibility? Well, absolutely not. Indeed, there are always going to be some drawbacks when it comes to actually interpreting this sample day in life video. This video is only drawn as an average upon averages. This entire video presentation that listening viewers and or readers, however few, may not actually realize the sheer amount of work that is expected, the sheer amount of editing, in between the lines and or in between takes, erroneous takes, as well as the amount of addendum recordings one after another that this author nevertheless feels compelled to add upon in the event that questions may arise. Again, this is just goes to show just how difficult it is. For more information behind this author's own personal nutritional history amidst involuntary structural violence, readers are actually highly encouraged to view the Expired Foods Guide Experiences feature presentation, in which that comprises of 3 dedicated video presentations towards the sharing of various workarounds, pragmatic research amidst scientific journalisms surrounding the handling and the consumption of various expired food products. Hence, there is bound to be some variabilities from one week to another, which is nevertheless necessary as part of scientific self-inquiring. Because this author too has a lot of variables still yet unbeknownst to his current capacity to account for in the long term. E.g., there are still numerous ways of breaking the fast that he is yet to experience. And also before that, there are still thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of combinations of ways of incorporating certain foods during the days and how those foods interact with others and so on and so forth. Hence, the chaos of cyclical keto plus intermittent fasting regimen is also its greatest virtues as well. This topic alone is very, very difficult to reconcile amidst today's survivorship, vanity-based health and fitness realms that we see today. Given the short and constricted spacing of this video presentation, this author will can only summarize so much. So hence, take it for what it is. Please conduct your own scientific self-inquiry to their most authentic entirety and to their most diligent and accurate entirety. Everybody may yet be different. This is once again by no means an objective totalitarian gospel. This is only contemplative encouragement towards individual exploration. Nothing more, nothing less. This author hopes that this video is both helpful and insightful for anyone wishing to one day foresee themselves to establish a similar way of life within structured impositions, involuntarily sanctioned way of living beyond consent. Once again, leave it forward and thank you for watching.